time. And I don't know whether or not this event is familiar to you all, but certainly in terms of the future of learning across every industry, especially where technology is not just an additive, but is sort of core OS. This is Grand Central Station right now. I mean, you could look at South by Southwest EDU, you could look at like BETT in the UK, but this one is like where the venture capitalists and the philanthropists and the heads of school districts and on and on and on are all coming together and saying, what does it look like over there? And over there is tomorrow or someday beyond that. So I just went there for the first time and it was overwhelming. The only way I can compare this is if you've ever been to Disney, but you didn't have a fast pass. And so you arrived at Disney with little kiddos in tow and you hadn't done your due diligence and planned, and you just went, oh gosh, dad's way over his skis on this one. Hadn't thought about breakfast, hadn't thought about where the bathrooms are. We're going to be in long lines. And then the next year you go and you have a fast pass and you do it purposefully, and each kid gets to kind of decide a day. And so my first experience was being overwhelmed. Bill Gates is a keynote. Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI and ChatGPT, was a keynote. Alice Waters, the restaurateur and the Edible Classroom founder, was there. The principal from Abbott Elementary gave one of the greatest talks I've ever heard. Really amazing place. But you can imagine it's also an intense place. So in the background was this little murmur of, I'm so excited to get back in a plane, come back, see my family. But right after that, I get to join this group. And I got really uncomfortable this last week. And I kept thinking, like, what the heck, I was going to be a little bit more of a pirate. What the heck do I actually mean by aha moments? And I hit a wall. It was one of these phrases where it's like, aha, it's like, epiphany, enlightenment, clarity. Like and also it sounds playful and kindergartenish, and like it situates itself beautifully in a good place, like poetry, but also like, yeah, more of that, please. And then I was like, I literally don't know where I stand. And I think what happened is I was trying to come up with a talk and had the slides and was going to sort of fake my way through with an exclamation point, meaning here it is, here's the 3 things to know, here's a case study, on and on and on, and here is how you create or design or invest in sort of these moments of aha. And to give you a sense of where I went in my head, I worked for a year and a half, most recently, prior to the current position I have, at a design build firm that works with Disney, Universal, Google, Smithsonian, designing the physical things that you interact with when you go to a zoo or a science museum or whatnot. And so it was like Santa's workshop, but constantly thinking, how do people, when they go into an incredible museum or aquarium or theme park, how do they have an experience? And what are the things they touch? What are they immersed in? What ideas do they encounter? What experiences do they have? What emotions or senses are enlivened? And I was going down that path, like, okay, here's how you do this as an educator, as a designer. And then I went, to be really honest, like, it didn't feel right. And the rest of the presentation is why it didn't feel right. So that second post-it with the question mark is where I begin. So I got to admit a couple of biases. When I was 14, my mother volunteered me to be a summer camp counselor at Camp Capella in a little lake in central Maine. You've never heard of the place. It's between Bar Harbor and Bangor, if you've ever been to Maine, but the specific lake, Lake Lucerne, you probably wouldn't have paid attention to. And I was 14 years old. Way unprepared for this moment. You can kind of discern the kiddos here were born into this world with challenge, but also really powerful sort of who they are and what they needed and what they deserved. And it was an incredible place to be a young person. I hadn't even gone through puberty, like 14, young, like middle school 14, becoming a 9th grader 14. And so that's where my life began, and my role as an educator, then eventually as a designer began, were in places called summer camps. But as a high school English teacher and coach and the dance chaperone, all the things you do when you're a teacher in a place called school, I taught English. And early on, I remember my very first day of 9th grade English, writing on the board, what is English and why does it matter? Perhaps the 2 worst rhetorical prompts to give 9th graders in the history of almost anything, other than take out your test booklet. That would have been a worse first day thing. And it was awful. But over time, students like these young women and young boys and young people of all kinds started to really push me on, like, why, literally, why are we doing this? And so my aha, if there was a literal, was like, the way that I thought one teaches and that one creates assignments, et cetera, was woefully unprepared for the moment, which is really if a young person, in my context, high schoolers, are going to care at all about what I bring in, I can't just show up assuming that what I bring in is worthy. And early on, I didn't understand what to do with that, but my intuition. These young women and a number of students in the mid 90s started pushing the boundaries on the classroom, literally saying this space, these assignments, these experiences, these conversations, like they could rise to the occasion, but you could just tell the light in their eyes wasn't all in. And I didn't want to get away with just like being smart and telling them what they should know for the future. This is an example where young people basically said, if we're going to study Romeo and Juliet, can we build a theater? We don't want to just analyze and sort of play act. Can we build a theater? And they did. Every day during class, they went out behind the school into the woods and literally constructed a theater. Obviously, wore, performed, videotaped, and then they broke it down. Every 47 minutes, they would build, perform, analyze, and break down, and did that week after week after week. That wasn't my idea. That was something that grew out of these young women just said, hell yes, like they went all in, and it shifted my point of view. I was also really fortunate, summer camp plus school, to be in a number of schools where experiential ed or out in the field work was central. So there was the field trip aspect, there was the community service aspect, there was the kind of outward bound light aspect, there was the camping aspect, and there was the what is that over there? This is a program in 1998 that I had the good fortune of getting to create. The pitch was, could we take a group of high school students around the country in an RV for 4 weeks without curriculum, without cell phones, without a map? And we did. For 8,000, give or take, miles, we traveled the United States for 25 days. And we did it. It was effectively, it was called Destination America. And the idea was, could we discover America, not get to places in America? So could we uncover the story of America, or the get lost, literally get lost down, dirt roads, which we did. 8 students, another English teacher, myself, did that, and it was game changing. It just utterly, when we got off the RV on the final day, and the parents were out on the sidewalk. One student, who at 16 already had his Microsoft certification, he was already making $30,000-$40,000 in 1998, doing code on the side, came down the stairs, and he said, and my name, I just said my teacher name, Mr. Blah, 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 and I don't think I can go back. And I was like, Doug, your parents are right there. What do you mean you can't go back? He goes, I don't know how to do school anymore. And he said, what we just did is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And he wasn't talking about traveling. What he was talking about is he got to discover not only what he was capable of writing about, noticing, interviewing people, comprising. He said, I think I'm starting to know who I am. And I don't know. And that really, I thought it was about the epic trip, the writing, the ability to bring partnerships to the students, getting the RV, 40 feet of it, back to the school on time safely without any damage. What I started to realize in 1998, that it had very little to do with the content. The content was the easy part. Over time, I was really, really passionate about the space. Like, we could build a theater out in the woods, we could travel in an RV. The classroom felt under potential. And so I took a shot at one point in time in 2000 and left teaching, which I adored, and went to grad school and convinced the folks in the program to let me create my own program. I called it School Design. I wanted to be an architect to design schools. I didn't have any talent for that, but I wanted to at 30 years old, to sort of leave a career behind and start a new one. Architecture is not a great place to start at 30. That's at least a decade, and then you make less than you made as a teacher before, as soon as you are lucky enough to get a job. But I was fortunate enough that there were places where you could be madly curious about the design of the physical environment on behalf of things that we believe in terms of learning, whether it be cognitive science, or whether it's like the ability for a young person to navigate ambiguity, whatever it is, or just like 4th grade English, whatever. And I was very, very fortunate to work with quite arguably some of the leading architects on the planet. This was a design by Trung Lee, who was my partner at Canon Design, who brought me in, and we co-led the Third Teacher Plus, that studio. And it's a Jewish day school in Chicago, and in some respects, it immediately arrests your attention. This is not the classroom you were in. On the other hand, if you really break it down, it's a couple of really simple, honorable commitments. You could probably analyze this and be like, if this is the design, what were the investments or expectations? And color and chairs that wobble aren't necessarily the answer, but they're the easy places to start. We also, this is when we were in Turkey and we were invited by the Koch Foundation to conceptualize the future of all middle schools in the country of Turkey. And so in some respects, this scale is everything. And this scale seems even more, but it's the same question. What do we mean by a place called school? Or what do we mean by a community who comes together to learn? What do we mean by the promises we make and the resources we have access to? And so this was just a month and change ago. This is in outside of Tokyo. That's Fuji Kindergarten. If you don't yet know a Fuji Kindergarten, you like anything about kids or schools, you will fall crazy head over heels in love. It's been named the most impressive school, architectural school project in the world by the OECD. It's a school completely round. If your eyes, you'll notice there are kids on the roof, and they're actually allowed to run on the roof. There's a slide in the background over my shoulder where they literally pre-Kers slide off the roof. It is magic writ large. And that's the founder of the school. And for 15, 18 years, I dreamed of going to the school and had the good fortune of finally being there. So it can mean a lot of different things. But let me take you to what keeps me busy now as I get closer to this aha idea. Again, the question mark. So I've been a massive fan of Think Global Schools since it hinted that it would launch in 2009, and in 2010, the first students came. The short line on Think Global Schools, an international high school, it is college prep. The students come from around the world and they travel the world 100% of their high school experience when they're together. So the faculty and students, quite literally, year-round school, 8 weeks in one country, 5 weeks off, 8 weeks in a second country, 5 weeks off, 8 weeks in a third, 5 weeks off, on and on and on. So that a young woman who starts out as a sophomore could be in 10 different countries over her sophomore, junior, senior year. It's also was originally IB. It shifted, it shed the IB 100%. That's a whole different story because it was creating two cultures, the one of discovery in the real world, one of empathy and being uncomfortable and trying to figure out the human experience. On the other hand, prepping for mathematics at the DP, the highest levels of IB. School is doing this. It shed that and went 100% project-based learning. The faculty and students co-create work. If they're in Dubai at Expo, their work is guided by that. If they're in rural Mexico working with anthropologists and doing Outward Bound, it's guided by that, on and on and on. So that's my employer. And while I am an educator, I don't teach at the school, but I get to serve them, I get to support them, and the school serves as a lab school for the team that I did join. So a year ago, we launched a new entity called Think Learning Studio. It didn't even have a name. It was just called the Professional Development Center. It was just, we have this incredible school. We can't scale it. We couldn't, even if we did a 10x, 10 times the number of students, 10 times the number of countries, it doesn't scale. It's expensive, it's complicated, people get too far from one another. But what you can scale are the sort of attitude. You can scale the point of view. You can scale the we don't know, but we're willing to try to figure it out. And so I joined last year, we launched, and now it's called Think Learning Studio. It's centered on the idea that project-based learning is inherently real world, it's inherently project-based, it's inherently collaborative, multidisciplinary. It can be service learning, it can be design thinking, it can be climbing trees, it can be startups and incubators, it can be project-based learning or problem-based learning, STEM, STEAM, all of the good stuff, right? It's all the good stuff. And our collaborators and clients and partners, the school, and we are both non-for-profit. So when I say clients, I just mean we're there to serve them. And there's an RFP, there's a project, there are deliverables. They may be interested in project-based learning, but they may not be. But what they are interested in is we have declared that X as a value or Y as a methodology or Z as a program is important to us. We want to go that way, and we're trying to create the conditions to pull that off, or to live up to it, or to advance, or be brave, or whatever. So we join them as they go there. So I'll give you a couple examples. This is a professional development workshop this summer, taking place where I live here in Columbus, Ohio, but we'll do more of these around the world. And in this case, we're bringing high school educators to come together to say, okay, whether I do PBL or I do whatever, are there some common methods that are adaptable regardless of protocol, or are there some common sense things, but also can they be more impactful? And we'll do that together. I'm going to come back to this at the end. This is actually going to be where I make my final point. Our team was just in the Great Barrier Reef. We did not expect to be invited by governmental entities to work with them, especially in our first 9 months of existence. But the Great Barrier Reef Authority, be like the Grand Canyons team or Yellowstone National Parks team, said, hey, we work with educators. We've been doing it for 2 decades. Can you help us reimagine what it means we invite educators to come to the Great Barrier Reef and engage? And so our team was down there leading a program with that partnership. We were just in Japan, as I hinted at, and we brought together leaders from around the world that are running some of the most innovative schools in the world. Green School out of Bali in New Zealand, School of Humanity out of Dubai, but it's virtual. But also the founder of Carmen Sandiego, Howard, was with us. And we teamed up with an international boarding school in the mountains of Japan. Haikuba is where the Winter Olympics were. It's one of so if you can kind of imagine a funkier Aspen as opposed to more illustrious Aspen in Japan. And we were together, and now that's becoming an annual event. Next year, we'll have a 5-day retreat like what we just did, but also a public kind of a Davos for education meets TEDx for education. So that's a thing. And after this meeting or this conversation, I'll be working with my teammates on behalf of the American School of Warsaw in Poland. And it includes Scott Widoff, who is one of the core kind of inspirations of the D School at Stanford and wrote the book Make Space, or co-wrote it with Scott Dorley. David Jakes, who just was an incredible Chicago-based educator, designer, just published the book The Design Thinking Classroom. Dr. Fiona Young out of Australia, one of the most impressive school architects anywhere in the world, but also grounded in research about learning, not just spaces about learning. And we were invited to help them. American School of Warsaw is in the midst of a $30+ million campus renovation, but it was this line that got us. We did not come out of the womb to be designing spaces, and they've already got architects doing that. But we were super curious when they said by 2024, if you just run the numbers on, even if you go to December 31st of 24, it's right around the corner. At ASW, pre-K through 12th grade, including faculty, staff, coaches, everybody will spend the majority of the time managing what they do and designing how they do it. As I said to their leadership team recently, no school in the world has figured this out. This is go to Mars, like declaration stuff. But if we get it even 3% right, and we create the conditions to keep going, something's going to take place. So we're helping them think about the intersection of space and time. So how do not only courses kind of get scheduled in new spaces. These are all collaborative, multidisciplinary spaces that are meant to pull in, pull out, et cetera. But who are we going to be as a community, as a culture, if we move in these directions? So if we are embedded in inquiry and curiosity and furniture that's agile, we can be the same school with some nice value add. But if we actually challenge who we are, why we exist, we make time no longer the thing that dominates our ability to do interesting work, it starts to change things. So we're also have launched a futures team, a foresight team. And it basically, like anyone, except we have less experience than a lot of the professionals that really do this. But we're really interested in foresight or futures thinking or design fiction in the sense that not so much can you predict the future, but can you put yourself in a space of thinking where you can imagine a multiplicity of scenarios in the future, and then sort of by design come back to where we are now and think, if these are all possible, how can I be response able? How might I attend to those things? How might I notice signals and trends evolving? How might we don't just predict the future, like the stock market or something, but how can we be adaptive and actually thrive as we go forward in the future, not just in a one-day scenario, but along the way. And so we're working with educators and school leaders and teams to think, are there methods, and of course there are, just like design thinking and otherwise, to have the ability to construct a future and sort of understand how we as human beings are going to be of use to that. You can imagine with generative AI and all of that, we are not waiting for one day or 2055. It started yesterday. It started 6 months ago. It's an attitude. We also launched a podcast, which called Wander and Wonder. I've said this to every guest we've had. This is a reminder to us, not about marketing to you or the audience. This is, don't forget that the point isn't to ask the right question. The point is to be lost. And the point is to discover a better curiosity once the speaker starts to tell her story. And so we've said to everybody, Dr. Chris Emdin, who's at USC, who's the founder of Hip Hop Ed and multiple New York Times bestselling authors, and really thinks about creating the conditions at the intersection of STEM and music, and particularly for young people of color who have been historically marginalized. How do you start there as a point of strength not as a point of recovery. Roseanne Bosch, an architect out of Denmark and Spain, doing some of the most stunning. She redesigned Lego's R&D's space, to give you a sense, but she does world-class work. Doug Abrams, who's written multiple books, the book by Rick Rubin that just came out called The Creative Act, he sat down with Rick in Hawaii, and the idea of the book grew out of their conversation, but he's co-written books with Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, Jane Goodall, David Attenborough, and he met with us and kind of talked about how he and his team think. Karen Bursepi, who founded the Riverside School in Ahmedabad, India, arguably one of the 5 greatest K-12 schools on the planet. It's where Howard Gardner goes to do research. She also launched Design for Change, millions and millions of kids around the world looking for real problems in their community, and then using design from kindergarten all the way up, human-centered design, to affect real change that they own, not that they're being curricularly guided through. Frederick Bertley, an immunologist who is the CEO of COSI, the #1 ranked science center in America, and then Saba Gol, who's a co-founder of Nuvu out of Cambridge, but Scotland. I think, frankly, the most interesting K-12 meets design, even more so than what the D school is doing. I think what's going on at Nuvu is just a different game. So all of these are ways that we are currently working, but also, to that last point, not knowing, but instead saying, tell me more about that, or what is possible. So we're going to take you to an image of a classroom. It represents a couple different things, but the practical thing is, this is a classroom pop-up that I was asked, and I brought in team members, so it wasn't me that came up with this, but I was originally asked in 2011 to design for a major national ed tech conference. And they wanted to create a classroom of the future. And I said no. It was a silly thing, because the project would have been really valuable to me as a consultant and a person doing work. But I said, no one cares about a classroom of the future at a conference. It's going to be like going through the Epcot Center, the kitchen of the future. No one goes home and goes, hey, I wonder if we should cook dinner that way. It's just a flyby. And I said, I don't want to design the classroom of the future, but could we create an experience where kids are thinking in ways that are representational of the future, so that we as adults can start to think differently with the kids? And so Prototype grew out of that. It was a program we ran around the world, which basically inviting young people to, kind of think about ways of making a positive impact in the world. It was human-centered design, but really what it was, as you can see, it became an interesting laboratory for not just what can they ponder and postulate in their head and pitch and prototype, but how do they actually do? How do they work? So we had all the major tech companies on the planet at that time that were giving us free technology. And what was interesting is the kids used blank journals more than they used the best technology that was available from a vendor in 2011. I don't mean what the teachers had in their classroom. I mean the stuff that they would have in 5 years. The kids didn't use it very often, because it turns out how they do, if we really attend to that, isn't the same thing as what we think they should do. This is a moment where they took VS's furniture. VS gave us like $100,000 worth of furniture and said, use it. And VS is arguably, like, they're doing the good work on behalf of K-12. And their furniture is amazing. And the head of marketing from North America was there this day. And I saw that table, and I had taken a picture previously, but all of a sudden I went, oh my God, our kids just flipped the table up on its side. And I went over to her and I did the thing we do. Hey, it's good to see you. By the way, I just want to explain that apology that sounds like clarity, but it was really an apology. And she took her camera out and took a different picture. And I said, oh, what did you do? She goes, oh, I'm sending this back to the factory in Germany. We need tables that become whiteboards now. The kids were not prototyping a table for a furniture company, which is the typical problem we as designers and educators give to young people. Hey, how would you do this? A prosthetic, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, my laptop is about ready to go dead. But what we noticed is they needed two things. They needed some semblance of privacy. So they flipped the table up to give their primal, like, corner of their eye just enough of a niche that they didn't feel like they were exposed fully. And two, they put cardboard on it because they needed to create a pinup board super fast. We as professionals translated that into a couple of things, but I've never unthought that. But even more importantly, under the table, I started seeing that the kids were doing marvelous things, writing on their shins, as you can kind of see at the bottom of the picture, using colorful duct tape to hack their shoes, And again, we didn't say design a tattoo of the future or design shoes for the future. But what was really unforgettable for me was that if we really pay attention, the challenge or the RFP or the curriculum is interesting and worthy of designing well. But how do we create the conditions where we, as the adults, whether we're leaders or we're allies, where we can notice things differently? And that has become, for me, where this talk, the aha goes from here's how you design it, to how do we design it? So I don't know if you've all read this book, but to me, it's super valuable. Educationally, I was really, a Socratic method was really important to me as a high school English teacher, the ability to ask a good question. But early on, it was my ego. What question can I ask the kids? After a while, it was saying to the kids, tell me more about that thing. And it was almost a discernment process in reverse. But reading this book, there was this, it's heavily focused on the idea of what are the questions that allow us to do whatever that is, whether you're Singularity University or Elon Musk or whatever. It's like, what are the great questions? If you're a researcher, it doesn't really matter. And there were a couple stats in there. And this is the kind of thing earlier in my career, and maybe even the original premise of this talk, is where my brain automatically goes, which is like, okay, if we know this about the learner, how do we mitigate, or how do we improve, or how do we stretch? Right? So we find a thing like this, like, wow, young people ask a lot of questions. Sort of like any grandma knows that, right? But in a book, it sounds really like hard science. And there's this, and I love this phrase, children are the R&D department of the human species. You know that deserves to be on a t-shirt, right? And yet, how many of us really live as if that's our truth? Like, we reference it. It goes on the PowerPoint slide, just like this. It's something we say at a keynote. It's something we say at a kickoff meeting. It's something we say about kids. But the real truth is, do we actually live that attitude? Or do we just refer to it like critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, communication, the 4 C's? Like, do we? I think I do. I don't know about anybody else. But if you go into it, and this was written several years back, almost a decade now, this is not when ChatGPT 3.5 and 4 came out. But if you read this and you think, oh, it isn't if we have this like utterly exponentially game-changing technology, will it replace us? It's actually, do we learn to ask better questions? Well, I think this is at the heart of good learning anyway, is the ability to ask a good question. But there was this part that says kids at a certain point in time stop. It's as if their ability to construct a question, and this feels frightening. This feels heartbreaking. This feels like, oh, Jesus, the test did it. But I also, as I look at the Zoom box of all your incredible faces and myself in reflection, I think it's not what we do to kids. I don't know that we know how to do this. And not just because school beat it out of us or undesigned it. I think we don't live in a place of questioning. And that's where this talk is going. So, the teacher's view or the school superintendent view or the designer of schools view is, why do they stop, and how do we create something so they come back and do it again, or at least the next generation will. More and more, I think about this over and over and over again. What I find is where it's inherently true, whether you have a budget or don't, is inherently there's a culture of inquiry. And that sounds very formal, rhetorically, all that stuff. But the truth is, it's just like, I don't know, I wonder, how might we? Why are you doing that? But also, it's embedded within a culture of trust. So it's not just the intellectual capacity to inquire, the scientific method. We have to have a hypothesis, and then we have to sort of evaluate X. Or if we do design thinking, it's human-centered. The truth is, it's the same thing. But if we do it within, even if we do it awkwardly within a culture of trust, those two things come rarely, but when they do, or when we notice them or make it possible, something begins to change. So this is where, if all that's context, this is the part. I'm going to ask you a couple of things. You certainly can throw in the chat if you want to. You can just, in your own imagination, you can shout it out, interrupt me. But as I've been thinking about aha moments, I have found that when I stay in the let's solve for X, or let's design for Y, or let's tell you what I think it should be, this, not that, Montessori is better than teach to the test or something, like, I miss something. And so this is a modest way of me wondering with you, if we're going to create aha moments, which is like epiphany, enlightenment, discovery, what are we missing? Or maybe what's right outside of our point of view. So hopefully you see a still image, but I'm going to hit play. I don't know if you can hear it. If anyone can hear it through the magic of Zoom, I don't think you can. You would just hear kids splashing and you would hear laughter. No words, no adult voice, just this. So the question as you watch this is, what do you notice? The video only goes like 60 seconds, by the way. But what do you notice? And since you can't hear it, would anybody be willing to shout out a thing you observe, a thing you notice? And it can be anybody.
They're sort of following each other. There's a follow the leader thing happening.
Nice. What else is
They're
noticed?
also cycling through. They keep going through over and over again.
Nice.
Not avoiding the water like you would think they would with boots on. They're actually just diving straight in.
Beautiful. Anything
Brianna
else?
says they don't have a fear of damaging anything, like a parent not saying, like, don't get your feet wet. They're not worried about that.
Awesome. Awesome. If we just attended to this moment and just played that question over again, you could imagine somebody would probably say something like, where'd they get those outfits? Where is this magical place where these kids dress like that? Somebody else might be like, ooh, which kid led? Even if they did circle around. There's a lot. What's in the backpack? Where are they going? Like there's a lot of like all of a sudden the question starts to come. But let's play it again one more time. And this time, what do you notice that isn't visible? As you try to make sense of this video, what's becoming clear when you're not focusing on the red backpack or the who dives in or where are they going or the dirt or the gravel? What do you also have access to?
Yeah, to me, I see there's someone observing them, probably an adult taking this video, but you don't see it's kids only, right? And there's a path, but no one's telling them, okay, keep going. We're on this hike or we're doing whatever they're doing. They're saying, here's a puddle. Oh, wow. They're super interested in the puddle. Let's just wait that out and see where that goes.
April, I really appreciate that. Yeah, you do start when you kind of allow your imagination, your eyes to refocus and pull back and sort of have that deus machina or omniscient view. You start, all of a sudden when you watch it, you start to notice the camera's moving slightly. So it's not on a tripod, right? Somebody's holding this. I'm going to gather, I don't know, that it probably isn't high, like this wasn't a professional film crew that came in, right? If you look at the angle, you can probably discern it somewhere between 5 foot tall and 6 foot tall. Like it's sort of at that adult view looking slightly down, but not too far away. And if you could hear, you would just hear laughter. You would just hear puddle splashing. You don't hear our adults. There's no direction. Literally, there's no directional other than the road. There's no expectation of direction. This is a forest school. There are 4 schools around the world. This one's outside of Halifax, Nova Scotia. The kids from 3 or 4 years old are outdoors 90% of the time. Now, if you think about Halifax, Nova Scotia, if you've never been there, it's up north of Maine. It gets cold in the winter. It rains a lot. It's overcast. The kids are outdoors all the time. It is a school where the action of being outdoors is not the rare or the field trip. But this is what I have started to think about a lot. I used to look at this video and think, how could we design a school like the forest school inside a place that's not in the forest? Or what's the metaphor of the forest school that could be applied to, you know, an 11th grade AP class or whatever. But in the last year or two, and this is what I sort of had an epiphany about this week when I was out at that ASU GSV event, when it was all about the future of AI and how are people going to compete for jobs in the future and what should a K-12 superintendent do to invest next, all this stuff. And I kept thinking there are human beings at the heart of all this. Like it's not the objects, the artifacts, the grade point. It's not the PISA scores. It is. It's not the billions of dollars that are being invested overnight in large language generative models. Is for me, the aha isn't here it is. It's, how do we go deeper on the people? And in this image, if we just took a snapshot, I'm 52 and change. I've spent a long time being in love with these young people and trying to create for them and learning and trying to be better and doing it in different capacities, from summer camp counselor to consultant. And just, I got 2 adolescents here in my own house, just trying to make sure I keep up with them. But weirdly, I'm starting to think they're going to be okay, but only if we shift the lens to who's not in this image. And I think post-COVID, we could talk about the number of educators who are leaving the profession en masse, that we could attend to the epic design challenge of who will actually go on this path with these kids. But what I mean is less that dramatic and existential, and more a matter of not their curiosity, not the little people with the red backpacks and the blue backpacks and this magical sort of, kind of Wes Anderson-like, sort of outfit. But if curiosity is what we're trying to create for them, if we're trying to help them have their ahas, their epiphanies, and we aren't doing it ourselves, if we aren't living in an ever state of curiosity, an ever state of wondering, an ever state of, I don't know, but could we find out? Then I start to wonder if we've already hit the wall. Like, what if we just said the kids have enough? They have more content they've ever had in the history of mankind. They have to know more than any child in any previous generation since the dawn of time. They are under extreme anxiety. Their entire childhood is college prep. And that's if they have the good fortune of being in a family or community where college is a resource that's within reach. And we're all about ready to enter a transcendent era or permanency where the very idea of school doesn't have nearly the same relevance. The very idea of to learn may not be dependent on a place called school, and not on the idea of like, oh, let's do an alt school. Like the very structure of the paradigm of school, which is relatively new, a couple hundred years old, is being taken somewhere else. So let me take you back to this thing called Curiosity Lab. So on the surface, it is bringing educators to come in and learn about things like design thinking, project-based learning, incubators, entrepreneurship, how to launch a new endeavor, create an app for that sort of thing. And it's in a space with all the right elements, the right tools, right technologies, right furniture that moves around, daylight, super collaborative, move around. It's like all of the right things. In essence, what it says to teachers historically is come to this place to learn a thing, to then bring it back to your kids, your kiddos, wherever they are. And we've been wrestling over this idea of when we have the privilege of working with educators and school leaders and those who care about them, local partners, parents, whomever. We spend a lot of energy focusing on the methodology, a ton of sweat equity focusing on rationalizing its ability to be assessed or to be pinned up on the board or to showcase at graduation or on FedEx Friday or whatever the trend is for whatever alliterative day of the week it may be. And we talk about collaboration and problem solving and all these things for the kids so that they can compete with robots in assembly lines, but also robots that are the chatbot that is giving you customized, personalized, just in time, all the time. The tutor that does not need to sleep, the tutor that is wired to be perfect for your child. What we are feeling as a team, what we're beginning to experiment with is, what if we didn't focus on professional development as a way to do better for kids? And I'm not saying we don't. I'm just saying that's not the end goal. That's not the cap. But what if we embedded educators inside experiences that young people are already having, and we didn't give them the playbook? We didn't give them the 5 steps to, and the handouts, and the PowerPoint slide, and the Miro board, and on and on and on, so that they could then replicate it for their kids. But what if we spent time actually saying, what do you notice as a professional, instead of, here is project-based learning 101. We're going to walk you through step 1, step 2, step 3. So you can go do that at whatever level and give you a certificate for it, even a digital credential. What if we said, this thing is going on. There are young people doing a thing. In our case, there'll be high schoolers working with local community leaders, trying to figure out in this summer about food deserts and try to build things of use in real communities. But the kids are leading it. And we invite adults to come in and notice. What do they notice? What do they wonder? But here's the key thing, not just the intellectual, not just the things that we can observe and we can rationalize, and probably the things that we're wired to notice because it's our sensibility. But what if we also said, what is your role in this? Are you relevant here? Do you like these kids? Why do you not feel comfortable with these kids? What did you notice one of the others thought? Did you feel competition or tension or agreement with that other professional? If we are creating highly personalized, just-in-time learning for every student based on multiple intelligences and everything, we're highly wired for empathy and highly wired to understand there are a million pathways, but we don't wrestle with, do you know who you are in that equation? If we don't wrestle with, collaboration isn't just a thing to agree to, it's hard, it's messy. And if we aren't really to be curious all the time, but we're training kids to be curious, let's be blunt, they read through us. They know we're not, so why should they be? And yet they already were. And so this is part of what I'm trying to figure out is, I'm not interested in the next trend, the next sort of innovation meets school meets why. I'm interested in that 13th year professional who walks in the room and goes, wait, what's going on? And saying, linger there, linger right there. And you're allowed to not agree with the PowerPoints. You're allowed to not execute and put that in motion. But what happens if we foster cultures where adults who have the privilege and honor and responsibility of working with learning communities, we created space so that we could notice together, we could be curious together. We could also admit our human or our humanity together. We could say, I don't like this. I don't like observing. I like designing for kids. I like to know exactly what's going to happen next. I don't want to be uncertain. That's totally reasonable. But if we don't talk through it, then in a faculty meeting, somebody says, oh, no, we can't do that. Yes, and, or yes, but is how it comes out. And it's not actually what they're feeling. It's a proxy for something else. And then we wonder, why are schools not likely to change or to evolve or to shift or to let go of the thing they've done since forever? And we talk about it all the time. We show pictures of laptops. It looks just like the classroom with the blackboard. And the real truth is, inside that are human beings, no matter what the tech is, no matter what the artifacts are, no matter what the curricular expectations are, whatever No Child or No School Left Behind is going to be left behind next. I don't know. But as folks that are trying to figure out the way forward, I think part of it is we don't know. Our aha is we don't know. Our aha is, how might we linger together and actually say, tell me more about that. Not so we can teach kids to say that, but actually so that we feel it. And this, on some level, is where I start with the aha, creating aha moments, is another question. And I think it has less to do with design the conditions, which, having worked with architects, having worked with curriculum designers, having worked with leaders, having worked with all kinds of people that are all designing great stuff, necessary things. I think it's not committing to the portfolio or the software or the curricular model. It's not arguing for an LMS or a more Montessori. I think it's like, are we willing to be human in it together, and not just so that our kids can one day feel okay? Like, how can we along the way feel awkward? How can we along the way feel super curious? How along the way can we look at at least our adult peers and say, I don't know either, but how might we? And can we, maybe we prototype, maybe we put a light touch version, a low res version, but maybe more importantly, we linger in talking with each other about it. Because if we're going to lose educators en masse, which is undeniable, there is no replacement strategy. Schools of education are not going to have more. Pensions no longer exist. The very idea of saying I'm a teacher is no longer seen as a point of respect. And those are the negatives. But also on the other side, the very idea of what we can do may not require us to do those things in the same way. With that said, this is the last part of the story. At the center of the picture, you might see this really incredible dark-haired young woman with a blue towel over her shoulder, sitting in a wheelchair. There's another young girl sitting between pads in her wheelchair, so she doesn't move too much because her body can't move too much. But if it does, it would not have the ability to move back into place. Between them is this redheaded sort of Irish pirate. His name is Uriah. He was 9 when I first met him. When I was 14, he was 11 the last summer I was with him when I was 16, and he died when he was 13. His body gave out. Uriah was incapable of language, but he could utter things and he was expressive. He could play kickball, but he would also collapse because he would try to run too far in legs that weren't built the right way. And for most of that summer at 14, I tried to make sure that Uriah would get to places on time and that we would clean up the blood from when he would fall and scrape his elbows, scrape his knees. We would try to get him to arts and craft and lunch back on the bus. And we tried to make sure that we didn't lose anything and that he was where he needed to be and he got back to his family. And there's two parts of this next realization. The one place that Uriah wasn't always colliding with the earth and always, whether he was dealing with seizures or dealing with the ability not to vocalize, or at the summer camp where the whole world, even the natural, most beautiful world in the world, was a barrier to him. He would go into the lake, Lake Lucerne, right between Bangor, Maine and Bar Harbor. And when he would dive in, Uriah was a porpoise. He was streamlined. He was built for that world. Nothing he did had a barrier except his energy level. If he was tired, he would sort of like great exhaustion. It was marvelous. And as a young teacher, young camp counselor for a decade or so of my professional career, I thought my job was to design the conditions so that Uriah would have a great time going to the lake, have a great arts and craft experience, get on the bus on time. I could tell his parents about it at the end of the summer and welcome him back the next summer. Later on, I realized how woefully wrong I was, that wasn't the goal, that was a starting point. And that if I was wise, I would start to notice that my job was to ensure that Uriah could be a porpoise every chance he had. How could he experience freedom, limitless, be graceful, be streamlined? And I know we couldn't have him in the lake 24 hours a day. He would become saturated and prune-like. And he had to go to bed. He had to have dinner. He had to do other things. And that's where I thought it stopped. That was my aha, so to speak, creating aha moments. I think what is more interesting in that is that I don't ever want to get it right. I want to be thinking about Uriah long after that first summer in 1984 or in 1987 when I learned that he had passed away because his body just gave out. And I don't want to come to a conclusion. I want to think the most interesting part of that design challenge isn't Uriah. If we start with all those responsibilities and we start with expectation that he is singularly capable, at least in one place, if not in many, and in one way, if not many. But ultimately, it's me standing on the beach, not knowing. What I didn't have at that moment was somebody to turn to and say, what do you notice? Tell me why you notice that. Is he late? Wait, what if we did? That to me is what's becoming more interesting. And I think in the spirit of creating aha moments with a question mark, that's the part at 52, nearly 53, with hopefully another 25, 30 years of career left to have the privilege to do this work. I think that's where, for me, the good stuff resides, in the ability to wrestle with the things that we have to, will feel humane and feel possible. So with that said, Aaron and Sarah, I was really frustrated 3 days ago that you gave me this topic because I realized I didn't know what I was talking about. And I hope all I've done in this last bit is just acknowledge that and be transparent about that and start to say, but I think these questions might be worthy of not answering, but lingering in. And with that said,
Kristen. It was awesome. Very inspired. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much.
the time. Oh, and I blew through. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, we got about 3 minutes or so. And yeah, just a reflection.
Sorry.
I think the thing that struck me most was no expectation of direction. That was my aha moment. That was the quotes that you shared that most resonated with me. And so we have like 2 minutes. Anybody have a quick question or comment in addition, reflection? We'd love to hear it.
You guys are wonderful for sitting patiently.
I was going to echo that, Aaron, actually, that no expectation of direction, and kind of coincide with that piece around questions. And as people age, they start to ask fewer questions. And I think, you know, and we see this with students all the time, where it's kind of like they get frustrated. Just tell me the answer. What's the answer? I know you know the answer. And we probably all work on setting up those scenarios where there's not an answer. And so it's like, yeah, I don't actually have an answer for you, or the best that we can set up those very free form inquiry, jargon, whatever. And so that kind of intersection of being comfortable with no sense of direction. With young kids, we see that really well with young kids, right? They are fine with no sense of direction and often thrive if we don't. But then we kind of funnel them in and squeeze into this, like, follow these directions, do this, and it's starting to happen at earlier ages. And so that question, like the fear of asking a question too, starts to play in, and that's part of why that asking of questions goes down, because you're like, okay, there's a one path that I should follow. There's a set of procedure steps, and then I shouldn't have these questions because they should be just step answer or goal or achievement. So that kind of, those two things are at interplay for me.
Yeah.
Thank you, April.
Thanks, April. Yeah. And I think with that too, you know, just the idea of like just managing time and designing how to spend that time to learn, you know, just like there's something there so interesting where I feel like, just kind of turning it a little bit, there's a lot of people that are exploring the management of time and the sort of autonomy and independence of that. But then not so much around the designing how, at least not, we haven't figured it out as much. And so much of your talk is about that and giving people that independence and autonomy and the curiosity around what all that can look like. So good. So yeah, April, kind of like a mishmash of some of the stuff you were sharing too, and some reflections there. But as we wrap up, Sarah, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much, Christian, for what you shared here today and for your vast experience. It was so fun to hear the stories of the things you've learned along the years. And it was fun to see also in the chat, I saw that you sparked a lot of interest. People were making connections to other things they learned. So just goes to show it was very engaging. I think we all took something from it, and we just appreciate your time here today. So thank you everyone for joining, and Christian for your presentation, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks
Bye,
all.
everybody. Thank
Have a
you.
good Friday and weekend. Bye.